You are listening to the Love and Money podcast, and today I have a very special guest. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, Cassandra, I'm gonna have you start off telling us who you are and what do you do.
Okay. So my name is Cassandra. I live in the Northern Virginia area right outside of DC. So in terms of what I do, I actually work for the federal government. I am an IT executive, but in my spare time, I also own real estate and essentially mainly all multifamily units for the most part. I've been doing this since 2010. I would say I had rental properties prior to that, but it was more forced being a forced landlord because of the market crash. But since 2010, I've been actively investing in real estate property in the Rochester, New York area, which is where I'm originally from.
Okay,
And so all of my properties are up there in Rochester in the cold.
okay. So that is impressive. So, an IT executive, and then you're
Yes,
doing multifamily since 2010.
correct. Yes.
So, I know
Thank you.
you. What is your background like? I know you said IT executive.
Mhm. So I graduated from Norfolk State University with a degree in computer science, and then I went and got my master's in business administration, and started. I've been working in the IT field since I was 21 because I graduated when I was 21, and just kind of went to several different companies at first. Then I landed with the government about 10 years ago, and that's kind of my sweet spot. Essentially, I've done a mixed bag of things: software development, also more on the digital, on the hardware side of the house as well. So kind of a mixture of different things in the IT field.
Okay, very impressive. And so, Cassandra, why did you choose real estate?
So really, decided to buy a house when I first moved to the DC area. That's, I would say, one of the biggest things that I did in my life is relocating from Rochester and moving to DC. And it wasn't that Rochester is a bad place or anything, but it took me out of my environment and I was able to kind of meet other people who were like me. I would say I kind of found my tribe, which were, other kind of young, educated, black folks. And DC has a ton of them. And when I arrived here, there were so many people that had properties, whether it was a rental property or a property that they lived in. So I decided to kind of take the plunge into it just from learning from other people, honestly. So I first bought my own property to live in, my primary residence, and ended up becoming a landlord because I rented that out and bought another property a year later, and then I rented that one out and moved again. So that's kind of how I got into it. Which, I was using FHA. I got an FHA loan, put down 3.5%, bought a property, lived in it for a year, and moved. And then eventually, I started utilizing the money that I get from my job to go and just buy properties as a normal investor would do. And really, it was another revenue stream. That was what I was attempting to create, right? And once I started to realize how much money was really in that area, I said, well, let's start doing this where we're buying like a property every year or so. Kind of the slow and steady pace is what I wanted to do. So I typically would do one like every year or two, just buying a property. And like I said, I like multifamily properties personally, although I know a lot of people who make money in the single family arena as well. But that's essentially what intrigued me, is kind of seeing other people make money doing it and then deciding to try it out myself. And I thought that doing it with buying the primary property first was, an easier way, I guess, try it out.
Okay, Cassandra. So you've been doing this a long time, 2010. What was your first experience like? Like your first property?
Yep. So my very first experience. So I won't talk about when I bought the primary. So initially, like I said, I bought a primary property, lived in it for a year, and then I moved. I'll talk about the first one that I literally bought as an investment, and that was up in Rochester, not in this area. Um, and so when I first started looking, it was 2010, so the market was very different than it is today. That was like pretty much right when the market crashed in like the '08 time frame. So the market was still pretty depressed at that time. So there were a lot of really good deals out there. In this particular property, I personally didn't want to get into a property where I had to do a lot of stuff to it because, quite frankly, I didn't know what I was doing.
Mhm.
So I said, I need to buy something that's turnkey. And that's exactly what I did. I bought a two-family property. It was in a neighborhood that I grew up in. So I was very familiar with the neighborhood, the properties, how much it really should cost. I had, a network in terms of being able to get people to work on the property if there was ever an issue. And so I bought it that way. And that was when I learned about seller's concession and, oh, they can help me pay like towards closing costs. And it was a great learning experience in general. Being I had purchased several properties as a primary, as a primary home, but I had never done it in an investor, as an investor, which is very different in terms of the type of loans that you can get and the down payment as well. So I would say my that experience was a good learning experience, and it kind of taught me. It got my feet wet in the real estate.
Okay. Well, the computer is frozen, but I can still hear you, so I'm gonna keep going. So, Cassandra, let me ask you, as far as your real estate investing, how are you actually financing it? Like, especially in the very beginning when you're first getting started,
Mhm.
how are you moving from the first property to the second property?
So at the very, very beginning, so this is before 2010 when I was buying it as a primary resident and primary property and then, renting them a year later. I was doing I did an FHA loan the first time, 3.5% down. I think the second time I just did it as, you're buying a primary residence. I think I had to put down like maybe 3 or 4%. When I did it as an investor, when I actually called the bank and said, yes, I'm buying this property for rental purposes. I went to, I think it was one of the big banks, Wells Fargo, one of them. And I had to put down 25%. The funding I actually got from my job. So that's why it's funny because I said right now we're in this culture where there's a fascination about not working.
Yes.
And like it's almost like, yeah, it's almost like a flex if you don't have a job. And I'm like, my job has afforded me so many ways to get involved in things, from an investment standpoint, because I'm very financeable, if that's actually a word. But
Okay.
if I call any bank and say, I work for the federal government and this is my salary, and I have a good credit score, they're going to fund, something that I want to do because I have that income coming in. So I personally was utilizing just the money that I was getting from my IT job, right?
Okay.
I get a bonus or just, the monthly salary that I get, I would put money aside and then buy a property. I know that a lot of people utilize taking out home equity, so they do kind of the Burr method when you buy, refine, and you essentially repair it or rehab it, I should say,
Mhm.
and then refinance the property. I've never had to do that. So I was always able to tap into my, the cash that I was just getting from my job. I think that I will utilize something like that, but only for a very big deal. So, if I decide to, buy like a very, very large apartment complex or something like that, I would, look into doing something, like a refinance, to kind of tap into that money to use it, to put that money to use. But I haven't really had to do that as of yet. I also have had the opportunity to do a 1031 exchange before.
Oh,
The
have
very first property that I, yes. So the very first property that I bought, I was like when I first moved to DC. So I was like 25 or so when this happened. And so I bought the property, and I had it all this time. And so just last year, as a matter of fact, when COVID hit and the market like started, doing so great, I was like, well, it was a townhouse. And this area is so freaking expensive that I was like, okay, well, let's see what we can get for it. Sold it, and it ended up being a very lucrative deal for me. And so I took that money and I went and bought multifamily houses up in Rochester. So I have utilized the 1031 exchange before, but like I said, usually I'm just, I do it from the money that I make from my good old 9 to 5.
Okay. And could you define a 1031 exchange for people who are not familiar with it?
Yes. So 1031 exchange is essentially when you sell your home for more than, what you purchased it for, which means that you will owe capital gains tax. So Uncle Sam wants a cut of what you made off of that property. You can defer that by essentially doing what they call a 1031 exchange. So you have to find, you sell the property, and then within, I believe it's either 45 days or 60 days, you have to find the properties that you are going to purchase. And then within 6 months, you have to close on those properties. And then that way it's like you're doing a swap almost instead of actually getting the cash in hand. You can't touch the money. So you have to actually have, there's a go-between person that will do the 1031 exchange for you, where they get the proceeds from your sale, and then they pay everything towards what you're buying in exchange. And then you don't end up owing, Uncle Sam a big tax bill because you made money off of buying the property.
Okay. That makes sense. And Cassandra, so you've been doing this so long. How did you know to even start buying property? Because you said you were like 25.
Mhm. So I think so. My parents owned a home when I was, I think, two. They bought their first property, so I was able to kind of see that growing up, where my parents bought like a little. I think they said they spent $25,000 for the house that I grew up in Rochester, and they sold that when I was like 15 and built a house out in the suburbs, and then they sold that and built another house, and then they just recently sold that and built this big house down in Georgia. So I was able to see, you know, definitely the progress, essentially how people can build equity and then, do keep moving up and up, right? So I learned that at an early age just from watching my parents. But
Okay.
my parents weren't into doing it as a business. Like, I never heard my parents really talk about making, doing a business of real estate. That was more from peers. When I first moved to DC, there were a lot of people. And when I first moved to DC, it was during that time right before the crash, when people could buy a property. It was going up like $100,000 in 6 months, and then they would sell it. So it was really just listening to other people and their stories, and kind of gleaning from them. And I decided to just take a plunge and try it myself.
Okay. Cassandra, do you teach other people how to get into real estate or?
So a lot of people have been asking me that lately. And I recently wrote, I wouldn't call it a book. It's like I call it a real estate guide. And I haven't put it out there besides to people that I know. And they're like, you should really publish this. And so I'm starting to think more broadly about, educating people in real estate. I started, my little Instagram page, which I'm horrible at posting on it. But I do think for 2022 that I am going to start thinking through a strategy and kind of how I can, and just help other people, especially for people. I would love to help other people that look like me, like, women, or, Black women, or whomever, would like to learn from me. But I also am in a sorority. And I just recently started a little real estate group with my sorority sisters. I think it's 12 of us,
Yeah.
where we're going to start. Yes. So we want to do that group economics thing and start buying property as well. So I do a lot of, like Zoom education sessions with them as well. But I'm starting to think of more, towards how can I, be more helpful in the community in terms of, helping folks and sharing my knowledge on real estate.
What sorority are you in?
AKA
Oh,
Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority.
okay. Curious. Um,
Mhm.
Cassandra, what advice would you give to a brand new person who has never bought a property before?
Oh, well, my first bit of advice is to make sure that you understand the responsibility that comes with buying a property, which is essentially a lot of when I first started, like I said, my parents had property, but we didn't really talk about finances, right? I think kids growing up, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and parents just didn't talk to their kids about that kind of stuff. I knew they had a house, but I didn't know, like, oh, you have to pay taxes and you have to pay insurance and stuff like that. So I would say also educating yourself on the process of buying. So, it's beyond just credit score. lot of times people are just focused on credit score, but knowing that you have to have closing costs, actually researching to know, oh, I can get up to, 3% seller's concession, which is essentially the seller can help pay towards your closing costs. So just making sure that you're educated on the process of buying a property, and also that you understand the responsibility of it, because it's definitely different than renting, where you can just call some 800 number and they come and fix your toilet if something happens to it. It's something that you actually have to do the work to get things fixed. But I do think it's worth it in the long run, because if you're just renting, when I think back of when I was a renter, I wouldn't have amassed the amount of um, equity that really contributes to your wealth, right? If I hadn't decided to be to actually buy my properties versus being a renter. So I do think that it's definitely worth it in the long
Okay. Okay, Cassandra. So this is a love and money podcast. So I'm going to ask you, are you single or married?
run.
And
I am married.
okay. And what have you learned about money as it pertains to your relationship?
Okay. So I'm married. I was not married when I first started though with real estate. I've been married for almost 9 years now. And in terms of what I've learned in terms of money, so I've learned a lot of things, especially from past relationships.
Okay.
When I was much younger, there were a lot of decisions that I made with your heart and not your brain. So that's probably the first thing that I would say is I've learned to make sound decisions with my money, I don't put anything in my name for anyone other than Cassandra. Especially if I'm not married, right? So that's probably the biggest thing that I learned from doing dumb stuff when I was younger. As a married person, I think that what I've learned is that you can kind of divide and conquer. So we don't put like every single property in both of our names, for example, because then when it comes time for, we can utilize, my credit or his credit for something else, versus putting everything in both of our names in terms of if you're financing things. So that's a big one. Also, I would say the other thing that I've learned is I think you have to do what's best for you in your relationship. Like I know some married couples where they feel like everything has to be joined. As for me and my house, that's not me. Like I can't, I don't want to balance any checkbook or anything, checkbook in the figurative speak, but I want to just deal with my stuff. I don't want to know what you spent at the grocery store and now I have to figure that out, right? So I think that you have to do what's best for you. And when I first got married, there were people that were like, "Well, you're not married if you don't join everything together." And I'm like, well, where they do that at? I don't want to do that. So I think you have to do what's best for you when it comes to love and finances, and just communication, making sure that one hand knows what the other hand is doing if you guys are doing things separate in the way that me and my husband choose to do
Okay. Those are some good lessons. So,
things.
Cassandra, what is your favorite book?
My favorite book. Hmm. So what I will say is I'm not an avid reader. I read maybe one book per year, but in terms of yeah, in terms of I do have a couple real estate books that I still keep, and there's one I can't think of who it's by right now, but it's all about the Burr method. I think that's actually the name of the book.
Okay.
And I really like that book, especially for people who are beginners in real estate and even people who are experts. And I'll get the name of it so that I can give it to you after this. And
Is it
but
by Bigger Pockets?
I think that the book does a really good. It is.
Okay.
Yes, that's it. So I'm like, I can see the book. It's blue. Like I can see the book in my head. Yes, but I think that it does a really great job of like gives you like that from an elementary level, if you don't know anything about real estate, even to people who know a lot about real estate, that they're able to glean something from that book, right? So I actually really really like that book, and I've actually loaned it out so many times to other people, where I just kind of go through and I leak through to certain sections that I wanted to learn more about. But for people who were brand new, I felt like you can read that from cover to cover and learn so much in terms of the real estate market. I'm trying to think in terms of personal books. I'm like, I can't really think of one that I would say is my favorite. If I did have to, I'm gonna go way, way back to like teenage years. The coldest winter ever. It has nothing to do with real estate, but it is a great book.
All right, Cassandra. I'm just curious about you said you started when you were single. How long were you doing it single before you got a partner?
Yep. So I got married in 2013. And so when I bought the first property up in Rochester, that was 2010. So I was doing it for about 3 years. Now, my husband and I were together at that time, but we
Okay.
weren't married. So
Okay.
yeah, so I kind of did all my but again, I had still had the two properties in Virginia that I had purchased in '05 and '06.
Okay.
That there is a townhouse and a condo that I was renting out because the market had crashed, so I couldn't sell them. But those properties I'd had before I even met my husband. And so in terms of that, I would say that once I got a partner, what makes it so much, it makes it easier for me now because like we kind of divide and conquer when it comes to, like I said, financing them, when it comes to managing them, because I've always managed my own properties. I tried a property manager and I felt like I had to get engaged all the time. Now that we have so many, we do actually pay where we essentially, I created a cut property manager. My cousin, who I trust, I kind of taught him how to do it and we pay him to manage our properties in Rochester. But prior to that, I was doing everything by myself. And keep in mind, I was like 20, 25, 26 when I first, started renting the properties that I purchased in Virginia. And so, what I would essentially do is they called, and at first I was have to go and Google somebody. And then eventually I started having my own, handyman on deck that I could contact, at any point in time. Whereas now, if something happens, my husband is very handy. And so they can, a lot of times he can talk, them through, like, let's turn the water off and then I'll contact a plumber, so he'll do a lot of the footwork that I used to do all by myself before. So it's been great having a partner. And I'm glad that he was supportive in, because he wasn't doing real estate stuff before he met me. So I was glad that he was supportive in me continuing to do it and then wanting to get involved and, kind of do this as a partnership versus just kind of, the thing that I did on the side.
Okay. I'm just curious for the people who are by themselves. I know that having a partner will make you stronger. So I'm just curious about that aspect.
Mhm.
So, all
Yes,
right.
definitely. But you can do it, but you could do it by yourself too. But yes, definitely having a partner makes it a little easier.
Okay.
It's not all on you, right?
Okay. All right. You heard her, listeners. You can do it by yourself. So, Cassandra, where can people find you if they would like to reach out to you?
So I am on Instagram as Pretty '08 Investor. So that's the best way to reach me on my business page, my real estate page on Instagram. And I
Okay.
do actually I check it
Okay.
and respond. So if you DM me there or subscribe to follow me on Instagram, you can definitely get in contact with me.
Okay. And the last question is, did you have any last words to leave for the audience?
Any last words? What I do actually have some is, if you're interested in getting involved in real estate, I think that you should absolutely get educated and take the plunge. Also, my probably the biggest thing takeaway that I'll say is I think that right now in the age of social media, that social media makes you feel like you have to go from zero properties to 106 months. And I always tell people it's okay to do things at your own pace. If somebody else may have been able to, go from zero to 100 very fast, that's fine. Define your level of success and what success means to you. And success to you may be, you buy one once a year or you buy one every 5 years, right? So I would say define your strategy and, focus on that, implementing that mandate, implementing that strategy that you put together. And if you don't end up accomplishing everything that you have set out to do, just tweak your plan and keep going.
Okay, I like that. All right, Cassandra. Well, thank you for being on the show and sharing your story.
Thank you for inviting me. This was fun.